As many of you know, I grew up in South Louisiana, where the French language is an important part of its Cajun culture and heritage. When I attended high school, the only foreign language we were offered was French, and so I took 2 years of it. And by the time I had completed an additional 3 semesters of French in college, I was beginning to even think in French. But in almost no time at all, having no peers to share the language with, I lost most of what I had learned because, as the saying goes, use it or lose it. I've always had a fascination with languages other than my native English language, but never seemed willing to commit myself for the long term that's necessary for them. When I moved here, I soon realized how important Spanish was, but after only a few half-hearted attempts at learning it, I gave up. And when I received a visit from a deaf person, I also realized the need for learning American Sign Language, but soon realized that it was going to take up more of my time than I had anticipated, and so I didn't go any further in the process. I recognize the importance of learning other languages, but it takes a lot of work. It takes daily commitment and persistence, something I seem to be in short supply of. In recognizing how much easier it seems to be for younger people to learn a new language than a person my own age, I sometimes wish that someone would wave a magic wand over me so I could immediately and intuitively communicate in a language other than my native-born English. But that's just what seemed to have happened in this morning's account of the coming of the Holy Spirit upon the followers of Jesus at a house in Jerusalem. As our text records it, the event was almost like a first-century fireworks display. But instead of the loud booming noises that accompany skyrockets and firecrackers, there was what was described as a sound like the rush of a violent wind. And instead of the pyrotechnic flashes that light up the nighttime sky, there appeared over the heads of the followers flickering flames of heavenly fire. But as amazing as these things were, they were just a prelude to the real miracle, which was the followers' immediate ability to speak in languages that others could understand. Barbara Brown Taylor, in preaching about the event, describes God through the Holy Spirit as performing artificial resuscitation on a room full of well-intentioned bumblers and turning them into a force that changed the history of the world. She goes on to ask, the question for me is whether we still believe in a God who acts like that. Do we still believe in a God who blows through closed doors and sets our heads on fire? Do we still believe in a God with power to transform us both as individuals and as a people? Or have we come to an unspoken agreement that our God is pretty old and tired by now, someone to whom we may address our prayer requests, but not anyone we really expect to change our lives? And so the question for us this morning might be, first, do we believe in a powerful Pentecostal God who is still in the business of teaching us a new language that will transform lives? And second, are we willing to learn that new language? Or have we decided that the language we've been speaking all along is the one everyone else needs to be speaking to? The world is full of different languages, which make it difficult to communicate with each other. Diverse languages like French, Spanish, English, and German can present challenges. But there are ways to overcome the language barriers. For example, nowadays, if you have Google Assistant on your smartphone, you can simply say, "Hey Google, help me speak Spanish." and you'll hear your conversation translated to Spanish on your phone. Much more difficult to translate, I think, are some other languages, such as the language of politics. Within the U.S., some speak in Democrat, some in Republican, and some in Libertarian, each political language with its own array of dialects. And there is the language of religion, which unfortunately seems to present as many challenges as politics, if not more, with some people speaking Islam, some Judaism, some Buddhism, some Hindu, and some Christian, just to name a few. And within each religion, there are barriers which divide its many sects and denominations. For example, I think it's safe to say that although we both describe ourselves as Christian, MCCers and Southern Baptists don't speak the same language. But if we really and truly believe in a powerful Pentecostal God who is still in the business of bridging communication barriers, then the differences in politics and religion aren't as insurmountable as we might imagine. The real question is whether or not we're willing to engage in a language that might make us a bit uncomfortable. Lately, I've seen what just may be God's Spirit working within the arena of LGBT equality here within our own city, introducing a new language of justice, if you will. People are coming together to strategize on getting a local non-discrimination ordinance passed that includes protections for LGBTQ people. I believe that God is always on the side of those who have been relegated to the margins. And so I trust that God's Spirit is present in those strategizing sessions, the goal of which is to transform Waco into a more inclusive city in which to live. But remember my second question. Earlier in today's sermon, the first question asked whether or not we believe in a God who is still in the business of giving us the ability to speak in a new language that will transform lives. And the second question is, are we willing to learn that new language? I can come up with all kinds of excuses for not learning a new language. I may decide that I'm too old and tired to learn a new language. Leave that sort of thing to someone who is younger. Or I may feel that it takes up too much of my time. I've got my routines that I would rather not change, if you don't mind. But there's another reason why I might not want to be involved in a new language. And it's that I simply have no desire to be in communication with anyone outside of my close-knit circle of friends. I may not trust the people who are on the opposite side of the fence and who oppose my beliefs. Unfortunately, there are some folks in our city who resist learning a new dialect to the language they call love, which they have been speaking for many years. But that can be expected. When God introduces a new language, public reaction is one which is often a mixture of curiosity, celebration, and resistance. In the verses following this morning's text, we read, "All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, 'What does this mean?' But others sneered and said, 'They are filled with new wine.'" Today, the public response is just as mixed about God's language of justice and love and inclusion for all people. Like this morning's disciples, you and I have been given the potential to transform the world with this new language. We have been empowered by God's Holy Spirit. My hope and prayer is that you will join me and others in putting away any excuse for not promoting this new language of love and justice that bridges barriers and dismantles the walls that separate us from one another. Amen.